Hi, Roy here. I thought I'd pop in to make an announcement about Victober. So next month, October, will once again be given over to celebrating Victorian literature. And as it's the 10th one, the cast list of hosts has been expanded to 10. 10 hosts. Yes, family size version. So more recommendations, more prompts and challenges. And the best thing ever to occur has happened. I'm going to be one of them. So there you go. That means I'll be telling you a bit about my own prompt later. If you've seen perhaps up to 9 other Victober announcements already, you might appreciate the bookmark I will have added to go straight to the prompts. But let's talk about Victober as a whole. Like I said, Victorian literature, that is to say, books written in Britain or Ireland during the reign of Queen Victoria, so 1837 to 1901. That's the scope of it, and there are, as I said, 10 hosts, so let's get into those. So Kate Howe reads. Her challenge is read a Victorian book where friendship is featured. Katie Lumsden, read a work of Victorian literature that is not a novel. Could be a play, short story, poem, non-fiction, but written during the time, okay? So not stuff written later about the Victorian time. Marissa's challenge, read a work of Victorian literature where a character experiences a change in class status, rags to riches, social mobility, fallen women, that kind of thing. Ros, scallydandling about the books. This is an interesting one because it's a sort of meta challenge. You know, it's something you can do within all of the others or whatever you decide to read. Just to say, of course, the prompts are here for people who like prompts. If you just want to read a piece of Victorian literature, that's absolutely fine. You're participating in an awesome way. Anyway, yes, so Ros says, empire spotting. See how many times you can spot signs of the empire in your Victober reading. Interesting. Then Elizabeth, a literary princess. Read a work by an underrated Victorian women writer. So not one of the Brontes, not Elizabeth Gaskell, George Eliot, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Christina Rossetti. Plenty more outside of that group, so that's a good one. Whereas Hannah's books, read a Victorian book that discusses education. Good one. Jess, who is on both Instagram and YouTube as Dickens and Docs. Step back in time, read a Victorian work set in a different era. So it's written during Victorian time, but set in the past or the future. So that's a great one. Milena's challenge, spin a digital colour wheel and find a Victorian book where the cover features that colour. And that could be any edition, old or new, of the book, but you're looking for that colour basically. So that sounds like a load of fun. What a great way to pick a book. Catherine, taking tea with Catherine. Read a Victorian book that has a connection to Jane Austen. So Jane Austen, famously not Victorian, but let's see about finding something that connects to her. And then finally, my one is read a Victorian work of fantasy. So I'll come back to that in a little bit. It's got a few more things to say about Victober. and then I'll elaborate a bit on this this fantasy idea. Obviously, that's a lot of challenges, and like I say, you might not want to do them at all. Just pick and choose. If you want to do, any of those appeal to you, that's fine. One book, say, can count towards multiple ones. So, a book by a forgotten woman writer about education, maybe, and friendship could be 3 things. And they don't all have to be novels. I mean, some of them specifically aren't novels, but I'll be reading some short stories, for instance, to sort of spread myself throughout the prompts. There is also a levels of achievement system, so it's kind of Victorian gamified in a really cool way. So let's say you do 3 of those, not in order, but any 3. That gets you to Mr. Micawber level.
In short, I have arrived.
Between 4 and 6, Jane Eyre. Between 7 and 9, that's Sherlock Holmes level.
Sherlock Holmes? Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Because of your demonstrable genius. Let's say you do all 10, Dracula level.
Well, and with all this, I thought I was in the wrong place. I bid you welcome.
Not because you're evil, but because you're now a sort of magical, immortal being. So, with powers. So there's all of that. Plus, if that's not enough, a group read, Hester by Margaret Oliphant. So, a Victorian novel, looks really great, and again, you can read it any which way you like, but there'll be a sort of a 2 chapters a day target for some of us who'll do that, so that means we'll get through it by the 22nd of October with a final sprint of 3 chapters. So, as well as the videos, all of this is being talked about on Discord. I'll link to the Discord channel below. There you'll find, people doing all of those things and talking about them, and probably other recommendations and resources as well, including a bingo card for the 10 challenges. So it's got the deets of them. Obviously they're in our description boxes too, but if you like to tick things off, if you want to plot your progress through the levels as you transform in a Doctor Who-like way from Micawber to Eyre to Holmes, you can do all of that if you want, and then you can download that directly as well if you don't do Discord. There's a link below for that. Okay, so my recommendation is read a Victorian work of fantasy. I mean, I think it's really interesting how many genres and subgenres and really types of literature that are still flourishing now originated in Victorian times, and fantasy is one of them, as a sort of counterpoint to realism. Realism and naturalism, massive, but then you've got a sort of flip side to that with works of fantasy, which you could interpret in any way, and I would say it's fantasy as you decide what fantasy means. So it could be science fiction, it could be supernatural stories. They're fantastic. But for me, in my recommendations, it's more about stories where magic works in some way, and perhaps where there is some sort of imaginary land or world. Okay, so that's the sort of, if you go to your local bookshop now and look for the fantasy, there'll be lots of stuff like that where there's adventures or quests or whatever happening in a made-up world with some sort of magic. So recommendation-wise, well, to start at the beginning, with a rather underrated work, Phantasmion by Sarah Coleridge. That was written in 1837. 1837. And it's got loads of magic. It's got imaginary lands. And it really is the first time all of that stuff happened. You don't hear as much about it as works by later, more bearded authors, but it's getting a bit more attention. I really hope a decent edition of the book comes out with some introductions and notes and stuff. But for now, it's available in decent copies from the usual suppliers, or dig deep in your pockets and buy one of the originals. So Phantasmion. The hero is given magical powers by a fairy, including, and this makes it sound a bit like something out of the Marvel universe, the ability to transform gets the powers of various creatures, like he can jump like a flea or fly, so there's all sorts of weird stuff going on. It's very dreamlike. Clearly it's a fairy tale, but it's obviously not entirely just a fairy tale for kids. So that's one. Moving later on into the beard zone, you could try one of William Morris's fantasy novels. So William Morris, yes, him, the designer, the socialist, political thinker. He wrote several books late on in the 19th century and late on in his life, and they are really, really interesting and fun. You have to kind of get into the groove with them. So, because he writes in a sort of archaic style, so they're kind of medieval style fantasies in pretty much a made-up world that seems to intersect with ours a little bit, with some great titles like The Wood Beyond the World, which was the first one. It's actually quite short. I'd probably make that my main recommendation, really. If you want a longer one, The Well at the World's End, there's The Water of the Wondrous Isles, The Sundering Flood, all good. There's Morris also, and this is what I'm going to be reading, George MacDonald, as well as his well-known fantastical tales for children. He wrote some fantasies for adults as well, like Lilith. That's the one I'm going to be reading, so I can't tell you about it from experience, just that it gets talked about a lot. It sounds really fascinating. You've got a haunted library that is a portal to another world, and the whole thing is a Christian allegory in some way. So, to me, that sounds like a good time. So I'm going to be giving Lilith a try. He wrote some other adult fantasy books as well. There's one called Fantasties, and some shorter pieces. Another kind of fantasy is the weirdness, where it's not so much another world where things happen differently as our world being seen through a kind of a lens of strangeness. And Arthur Machen is a writer who does that sort of thing really well. The Three Impostors is a short novel that's really a linked set of stories that transforms London into this strange, sometimes gothic, sometimes alarming place where sort of coincidence and chance meetings and the act of wandering about like a flaneur sort of character reveals all sorts of weird things. So Machen, particularly The Three Impostors, could be good. Well, poems are a thing as well, such as Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. Amazing, lush, dreamlike poem. Or there's sort of Arthurian fantasy as well. Tennyson's Idylls of the King. maybe read, you don't have to read the whole thing. I think there's 12 sections there that are all sort of freestanding in a way, so that's a possibility. And then there are fairy tales, and Andrew Lang, he put together collections of fairy tales that were the coloured fairy books. So they each one's got named after a colour, blue, green, etc. Goes right through the rainbow and beyond. In fact, the series continued beyond the Victorian time, though I think that's okay as it's a series. Could be good if you're doing the colour wheel thing, because pretty much always the case that editions of the book will match the colour on the cover. So if you're looking, where do I find a violet book? The Violet Fairy book. Why not? Then you got your Lost Race sort of colonial adventures, things like H. Rider Haggard. She, for instance, they do have sort of fantastical elements. That's another thing, whole subgenre started then, carried on through the 20th century. So I'll stop there, throwing some ideas out. You might have others. But yeah, exploring fantasy. Oh yeah, comic fantasy. Not so much comic books, but things like Vice Versa by F. Anstey, which is basically Freaky Friday. That's a kind of fantasy too. I've not read that. In fact, I might try and add that into my TBR as well. Okay, so all of this stuff, October. Do check out the other channels and their recommendations, and keep an eye on us as much as possible, because there'll be interesting stuff coming up. I'll do a TBR for how I'm going to approach other people's prompts, so get that out sometime later this month. Victober. I have another event to announce on this very day. Just thought I'd put that out there as well. I'm going to make them overlap very slightly. Why am I telling you this? I don't know. Okay, back soon with something else.